meeting. So we have present today Alderman Briscoe, Councillor Harvey, Alderman Varakis and Councillor Dutta. And have we heard from Councillor Coates, Mr Banks?
Not as yet, Chair, no.
Yeah, all right. Well, we do have a quorum, and I just ask that people we'll do this by consensus, or if there's any dissent, I'll ask for voting. So just raise your hands, please. On screen should be fine because I can see all of you. I'd like to acknowledge that we meet on the land of the Palawa people of Tasmania, La Trawitta, and pay respects to elders past and present, and to pay respects to the Aboriginal people of Tasmania. We now have Councillor Coates with us. Welcome, Councillor Coates. And we'll go to the order of business. We have nobody to co-opt. Item 2 is confirmation of minutes. Have somebody move that. Thank you, Alderman Briscoe. Those in favour, is there any dissent? No dissent. That's carried. Item 3 is consideration of supplementary items. I don't think we have any. Item 4 is indications of pecuniary and conflicts of interest. Any conflicts? No. Item 7, committee acting. Oh, sorry, item 6, sorry, item 5, transfer of agenda items. Item 6, planning authority items, considerations of items with deputations, which we'll hear first. And Alderman Briscoe has moved that. Is there any dissent? No dissent. So we'll move to item 7. Committee is now acting as a planning authority. And we go to 7.2.1, which is 345 Sandy Bay Roads, Sandy Bay and adjacent road reserve for demolition, new buildings for 7 multiple dwellings and associated works. And I'll call on Mr. Bill Reynolds, if you'd like to turn on your camera and microphone, Mr. Reynolds, and you have 5 minutes to address the committee with your concerns. Thank you. I can hear you.
It's all right. I wasn't sure if you could.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Right.
we can hear you now.
Thank you. I am Bill Reynolds, and with my wife Linda own and live at number 2 Earl Street. We adjoin the proposed 4-storey development in Sandy Bay Road on its southwest boundary. I have made a detailed response to this proposal. We are probably the most affected adjoining property by this proposal. We moved to Hobart 16 years ago with our 2 school-age boys. We bought this property about 16 years ago, putting a lot of thought into environment, sunlight aspecting and convenience. It has great streetscape space with views over the uni fields to Mount Wellington. It was close to Taroona High, Hobart College and the uni, very convenient to facilities. And in particular, north aspecting, albeit by northeast and northwest walls. We accepted the existing building to our northeast. The subject site was bland, bulky, overlooked us and would shade us slightly in absolute midwinter. We did extensive alterations and rebuilding. In particular, we cut in full height glazing to the northeast wall to bring pre-noon sunlight into the kitchen and living area, habitable rooms. Reference to my plan clearly shows these windows. Note, the proposal drawings do not show this glass. Reference to the section A and B on the proposal drawings clearly show the proposal extends significantly beyond the building envelope on all boundaries and in height. Note, the existing eaves coincide with the intersecting point of the 45-degree setback line and the max height line of 8.5 metres for the building envelope. The proposal extends beyond the building envelope, in our case by a full story in height and into the 45-degree setback line by 5 metres. The green wall 2.5 story high to us, only 1.5 metres off our boundary and outside the setback by 5 metres in height and plan. The bedrooms cantilevered over the car ramp, 3 metres off the boundary, 3 stories high and outside the setback by 3 metres in height and plan. These extensions beyond the building envelope make an enormous impact on us in height and bulk and closeness to boundary, and in particular on sunlight to our windows. Given that the building is outside the building envelope, it is assessed against many performance criteria, and in particular for us against scale, bulk, massing, proportion, amenity, and reasonable opportunity for daylight and sunlight to enter habitable rooms. With respect to us, the proposal causes unreasonable loss of amenity by virtue of height, scale, bulk, and proportion. It significantly and unreasonably reduces sunlight to ground floor habitable rooms. At ground level, half of our habitable room glazing is on the northeast wall. This half will be lost to us through the winter until midday. Reference to the sunlight drawings and my drawings clearly show this. It seems apparent that in designing this proposal, the decision was made to ignore the impact on our northeast wall, half of our ground floor habitable room glass, on the grounds that we get enough sun post-noon. The proposal drawings do not even show our northeast glass and are incorrect with respect to levels. No survey was done. Further, it seems the sunlight drawings have been done on the assumption that the buildings are set 45 degrees off north. I would be pleased to be advised about this. In fact, they are set 33.5 degrees south of east on the northeast face and 56.5 degrees south of west on the northwest face. Refer my plan. This is significant with respect to sunlight aspecting. Our northeast wall is favoured for midday sun. None of the impact on our pre-noon sunlight is reasonable. We feel this proposal has taken everything it can from the site with complete disregard to the impact on us, particularly with respect to sunlight. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Reynolds, and I'll open it to the committee for questions. Any questions? No questions. I have a question. So, I mean, in the report it does make reference to those concerns, particularly in relation to sunlight, but obviously there's still that impact. So you do get some sunlight from the Earl Street window, but I presume that that's not really what the point that you're making presently.
That is correct. I get sunlight on the Earl Street windows obliquely because the building is actually 46 degrees off 45. They are not favoured windows. They get more western light than northwestern light. Yes, we get it, but we don't get it until the afternoon.
And just in relation, so obviously it's that presumably the biggest problem for you is that fourth story in relation to that sunlight. Is that what you're saying?
Well, the fourth story, yes, but in fact the design also protrudes outwards closer to the boundary than the fourth story, up to the same angle. The green wall, for example, and the bedroom wall, which projects out over the ramp to the car park, both cast shadow on us.
I see. Thank you. Any further questions? Councillor Dutta.
Thank you, Chair. Just a follow-up question. With regards to overshadowing, would you agree that, according to the report, it's not really unreasonable?
No, I wouldn't. For me, morning sunlight is very, very desirable. This turns our house into a cold environment until local noon, and even then the sunlight is only striking the north corner of our building.
Thank you.
Okay, if there are no further questions, thanks, Mr. Reynolds, and stay online and we'll hear now from the applicant. So we have Phil Gartrell, Mr. Rory Hunter and Scott Verdot, who's from Jaws Architects. Thank you. So you've heard the concerns that have been raised and read the report. Is there anything that you can do to mitigate some of those concerns?
Yeah. I'm Phil Gartrell from R&E Planning. I'm just going to run through some of the main sort of concerns. In relation to Earl Street, we'd just like to acknowledge that the isometric shadow diagrams don't show the 2 ground floor windows that Mr. Reynolds referred to. We understand that these windows, through Council's report, do provide light into a kitchen and dining room. Whilst there will be some increase in shadowing of the northeastern elevation between 11 AM and 12 PM, the diagrams do show that there will be no overshadowing of the dwelling after 1 PM. In addition, the majority of the windows along the northwestern elevation facing out onto Earl Street, which provide light into the main living room, they will continue to receive over 3 hours of sunlight. In terms of the shadow diagrams and in relation to private open space, the space between the dwelling and the frontage will also receive at least 3 hours of direct sunlight on June 21st, as will the space between the dwelling and the north-western boundary. Just in terms of visual impact, the building, the upper level, level 4, has been set back from the boundary to Earl Street by levels 1, 2 and 3, I think 3.5 metres, and then the upper 4th level has been set back a further 1.5 to 4.5 metres. That's been deliberately done to reduce not only visual impact but also reduce the extent of shadowing as the sun moves around on June 21st. So those setbacks, in our view, substantially reduce the visual bulk and scale of the building, as well as as a result, the overall appearance of the building will not be substantially dissimilar in our view to the existing building when viewed from Earl Street. As has already been noted, the upper 4th floor only extends 1 level higher if you include the roof than the existing building on the site. Just in terms of the overall form of the building as well, the overall form and architectural treatment is more varied and articulated than the existing building, and the green wall and planters along the northwest elevation will also assist in breaking up the form when viewed from adjoining properties. I do have a summary around impacts and dealing with the impacts around 347 Sandy Bay Road, and I can go into those in questions if anyone had questions in relation to those.
Did you want to add anything else?
Yeah, so I guess the design team, we've worked hard on reducing the overall form and massing. Especially for the top floor, we've made that lightweight and we've stepped that back in. The lower floors use materials, especially brickwork, to reference the rest of the streetscape and similar buildings of similar height around the area as well. We've also recessed the podium ground floor level to increase areas for landscaping and private open space. So using some of those tools, the northwest corner on Earl Street, we've also pulled that corner back in to allow more or sunlight to come in earlier to number 2 Earl Street as well.
So I might just to clarify as well, the windows along the northwestern elevation of 2 Earl Street will also receive over 3 hours of sunlight on June 21st as well.
Yep. Right. Okay. So that's your presentation?
Yeah, I'll just close by saying that we conducted considerable community engagement. We held a number of information sessions where all the neighbours within a 100-metre radius were invited. I've sat down with Mr. Reynolds on numerous occasions, and we've really ensured that we can incorporate any of the broader concerns within the design. And I think probably the final element is from a broader sustainability aspect. We're really looking at incorporating quite pioneering technologies into the construction of this project, which I think is really relevant from a broader planning perspective. And so this will be the first timber multi-res construction in Tasmania using cross-laminate timber. So I think we feel very confident that we've addressed the planning concerns, the neighbour concerns, and are really quite excited about what this project can bring to Hobart.
Rightio, thank you. I'll open it to the committee for any questions. Committee? Councillor Dutta.
Thank you, Chair. Just one question. Would you agree that the shadow diagrams clearly show that there's going to be increase in overshadowing both in 347 Sandy Bay Road and also 2 Earl Street?
Yeah, so there will be a slight increase in overshadowing on those 2 properties, but as we've shown in the shadow diagrams, those properties will still continue to receive over 3 hours of direct sunlight to Habitable Rooms on June 21st.
Thank you.
Further questions? I have a question, and it goes to that point as well. The 4th story is one dwelling, and it seems to me that's where most of the problems with overshadowing are likely to occur. So is there no sort of design response to reduce that further? I've talked at length with Mr. Reynolds, who relies quite a lot on that morning sun. And certainly, as Councillor Dutta has raised, there's obviously concerns for the neighbouring property on Sandy Bay Road. So is there not any way that can be recessed, given I believe it's outside of the building envelope at that point?
So we've set back the top floor 4.5 metres from the northwestern boundary, and we've modulated that top floor as well, so that sorry, we're just finding the page.
You're right.
And especially cut back from that sort of northwest corner. That's really the area that we're really conscious about, I guess, letting that sun in earlier in the day. We've also got as much of the outlook from that particular floor over the streets and not over the neighbours. So through screening and orientating the windows out to the sides, that also assists with privacy.
We spent quite a lot of time when we were going through the design development stage looking at shadow impacts, and we actually reduced both the function and the form of the building quite considerably. So we did work very hard to ensure that Mr. Reynolds and the neighbours at 347 do get greater than 3 hours of sunlight on that June 21st. So we really have been conscious of that, and we've worked very hard to make sure that we can deliver that.
Okay, any further questions? And, oh, Councillor Harvey?
So
the overshadowing, is that more excessive because of the fourth floor or because of the positioning of the building slightly closer to the boundaries?
I would probably say that it's a combination of those two things to a degree. Obviously, pulling that upper level back from 2 Earl Street and back from the corner of Sandy Bay Road as well does assist in reducing that impact. But the building, the lower levels are also slightly closer to Earl Street and Sandy Bay Road. So it would be a combination of partly the lower floors and not to as much of an extent because they're obviously lower, but it would be a combination of both of those two things. But that's why we've really tried to focus on that the tallest element and pulling that back as far as we can from both Earl Street and the boundary with 2 Earl Street to allow that light to come through as the sun shifts through the day on June 21st.
Yep. And this proposal meets the acceptable solution, as I understand, for overshadowing.
Correct.
Just in relation to parking and any sort of accessible parking, I know it's not mandated, but is that something that could be considered is there enough space to have to accommodate that as part of this development?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the apartments and the car park area themselves are accessible. For wheelchair, it's good to have an area next to the car where you can actually have extra width over and above a normal car parking space. I think there are at least 3 spaces in that basement that have assigned areas next to them for storage, which could be set back a little bit further so that there's enough room for wheelchair accessible spaces. So yeah, if there is someone who has ambulant difficulties or is wheelchair dependent, these apartments and car park area are accessible.
Thank you. Do we have any further questions from committee? If Councillor Harvey again.
You're promoting the eco benefits of this building. Could you just explain to me how you're going to interact or incorporate bicycle parking? I'm just scrolling through the plans now, but I haven't got to it yet. Hang on. Yeah. So what are you suggesting with regard to other forms of mobility within the building? From the building for residents?
Yeah, so along with areas for bike storage, there'll be multiple electric vehicle charging stations within the car parking facilities.
So all car parks will have access to chargers?
Correct.
And bicycle access as well? We've got a bike shed? Yep.
Yeah.
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
Thanks, Chair. All right, thank you. And I'll now open the item for discussion. Is there any questions, firstly, of Mr. Noy? Barakis?
Thank you, Chair, and I'm happy to move the application, move the motion at the right time. But I know there's a bit of back and forth about the overshadowing, and I think that's probably the pertinent issue here is the impact it's going to have on 2 Earl Street. Can we just get some, for the benefit of the committee and everybody here, some advice from the director as to what constitutes reasonable sunlight and an unreasonable amount of overshadowing from a planning perspective?
Yes, Chair. Look, the officers have spelled out that aspect in 6.2.23. in relation to Earl Street in particular. I think it's acknowledged that there is an increase in overshadowing, but it's the view of the officers undertaking the assessment that the majority of those spaces within 2 Earl Street windows will get 3 hours or more direct sunlight, and that is I suppose a figure that we normally refer to so far as reasonableness to direct sunlight.
So that just as a follow-up, that is the generally accepted benchmark for reasonableness, and I imagine that's got that's been backed up by tribunal hearings or such.
That's correct. That's correct.
Further discussion?
If there's no further questions, Chair, I'm happy to move the recommendation.
I think you have. Yep. Thank you.
Sorry.
I hadn't moved it yet because I was waiting for people to ask questions.
Oh, I see.
I'm happy to move it. Chair, I think this is an example of a really forward-thinking development that we have in front of us. I know there are some concerns about the height, but I think as you read the report, you actually spend some time down in that area. There are quite a number of buildings in that, just on that street and in that vicinity, that do have similar built forms. And I think when we talk about something that I think was mentioned is pretty forward thinking in so much as the materials that it's going to be made out of and the construction method, but also what it's going to help provide to us and so far as housing supply, in a way that does fall in with the performance criteria of our planning scheme. I think it's also from an infrastructure, from a mobility perspective, it is on a road that has already existing bike facilities and infrastructure. As Councillor Harvey asked and was answered, there are bike facilities included on the site, and it does. And I checked it on Google Maps as we were talking. It's 159 metres away from the closest bus stop into the city. So there's options there for people that want to walk. There's options for people who want to catch public transport or active transport, and there's obviously parking options. So I think it does cater to a wide variety of people. And I think, therefore, it's not going to be just people filling up car park and jumping out on the road with however many cars. I think there's a good mix there. And I think it's something that will be trend setting for the city. And I think it's something that will ultimately be beneficial. So I hope that this would pass. I think it's a great example of an appropriate and sensitive development. And I'd contend the suggestion that's been put by some, not that we'd heard it tonight, but in some of the representations, that this constitutes a high rise in Sandy Bay. I think that might be a bit far-fetched, but ultimately I do think this is quite a sensitive development, and I think it's one that will benefit the city and the local area.
Thank you. Councillor Dutta, then Councillor Harvey. Just on mute, Councillor Dutta.
Sorry, Chair. No, I am of the view that the evidence and the facts presented to us do suggest quite clearly, and even from the report, that there's going to be increased overshadowing. Now, that is of concern. And also the report makes very clear that the diagrams indicate that these courtyards currently are overshadowed throughout the day. Now, my reasoning is this, that if this building is going to be demolished, then we are not using the former planning scheme under which this building was built in 1970. We are using the current planning scheme, which very strongly talks about overshadowing. And therefore, I think the evidence presented to us from Mr. Reynolds has validity. And that, again, it is supported quite clearly from the report that 2 Earl Street will be overshadowed, with an increase. And therefore, I will have hesitance supporting this on those grounds. Thank you.
Councillor Harvey.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Look, I've considered both sides of the argument here, the deputation as well. And on balance, though, I will support the officer's recommendation. they've informed us that the acceptable solutions have been met with regard to the overshadowing. It's unfortunate that the neighbour does lose some sunlight, but I will be supporting the officer's recommendation for approval because it has met the acceptable solutions as defined in the planning scheme. But I'll also make a brief comment on the design of the building, which I think is quite a landmark building. Being on the corner there also, it's a very visible site, very visible spot. I think there's been a lot of effort going into the environmental elements of this building as well. So I think I've got to acknowledge that, and the use of cross-laminated timber, the fact that it's future-proofed for electric cars, I think is an important element. And it's additional units close to the city, close to a bike net, well, the Sandy Bay bike path, also through to the Battery Point area as well, close to amenities. So I'll be supporting it tonight for those reasons. And I do think it, and I hope that the developers can deliver what they've promised in their plans describing this building and the designs we see in the plans. So yes, I'll be supporting it tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. I just dropped out there, so I'm on my phone having difficulty with my computer. So bear with me. Is there any further comment from, if you can just speak, please, for the time being? Any further comments? I wonder, Alderman Barakis, if you could suggest some advice just in relation to accessibility car parks as part of your conditions for approval.
What's the advice?
Provision be made for accessible car parks in the ground floor car parking, the basement car parking.
Yeah, I'm happy to include that.
Thank you.
Chair, could I just clarify what you're requesting there? Didn't I hear that the car park below would meet those requirements already?
It's not actually factored into the design as accessible car parks, Councillor Harvey. I'll ask the question of Mr. Noy, though.
Yes, Chair, that's correct. They're not necessarily compliant with the relevant standard, but nor is it a requirement for that standard to those provisions to be made for disabled car parking dimensions. But as you've heard from the applicant's representatives, with some slight modification of adjacent storage areas, then provision could be made for compliant disabled car parking spaces. So I think what we're saying is that could simply be an advice clause that consideration be given to providing disabled car parking spaces, compliant disabled car parking spaces.
Okay, so that's advice. Thank you.
That's correct.
And Mr. Noy, I'll ask a couple of questions of you as well. Just in relation to the private open space, is there a deficit in relation to the private open space?
Look, so far as the acceptable solutions is concerned, it's not non-compliant, but the quality, the location meets the performance criteria under the scheme. And
in relation to the building envelope, how much, what sort of percentage is the development outside of the building envelope?
Look, I'd need to refer to the report, Chair, for that figure. So you'd have to, I just need to refer to the relevant section on that, and that might take me a little time.
Okay, well, I might just make some comment whilst you're looking for that then. Look, I would really want to support this application. I see that there is some fantastic design features, but I also see some features which, with clever design, slightly cleverer design, which is not any sort of there's no slight on the applicants and the architects who've put this together, but I just believe that if this penthouse on the fourth floor could be further set back, could consider the overshadowing, and I know that it's also partly because of the setback from the boundary fence for the whole building, but I just feel that there is a consideration. This is meant to be an eco-friendly building in its design, and yet it's taking away some valuable sunlight from habitable rooms for neighbours. So I'm just a bit disappointed, and perhaps the applicant could think about that between now and when this application goes to council. Mr. Noy, did you find the relevant section?
Yes, Chair. Look, it's on page 182 of the report. So it's in. It appears that it's very difficult to read these plans, but it's approximately a storey high, so it's in the order of 4 metres.
So it's about 4, so 1 storey outside of the building envelope.
The acceptable solution envelope, Chair.
Yeah, and I might make the point that whilst Alderman Barakis has said that this is Harvey high rise, and I absolutely agree, there are certain standards that are to be met through our planning scheme, and whilst we have the performance criteria, then that may be so, but this is of concern to quite a number of people, not least of all the neighbours. So if there's no further comments, I'll move the motion as slightly amended, as moved by Alderman Barakis. Is there any dissent? All right, so show of hands, or Dave, can you read that? Can you tell us who voted for it and against?
Yeah, so for was Alderman Briscoe, Alderman Barakis, Councillor Harvey and Councillor Coates. Against were the Deputy Lord Mayor and Councillor Dutta. Okay, so that's carried, and that will go to full council next Monday. Thank you. We move now to 7.2.4, which is 5 Alexandra Street, Sandy Bay. It's demolition and 3 multiple dwellings. And we have Mr. Ian Johnson, who's a representative, and I believe he's being joined by others at this deputation. So they're just connecting now, is that right? Mr. Banks, could you... Yeah, they're just coming in now, Chair.
Right, thank you. All right, Mr. Johnston, when you're ready, if you... Oh, hello. So when you're ready, if you'd like to provide the committee with your 5 minutes of deputation, thank you. Just, yep, take yourself off mute. Yep, that's it. Thank you.
Hey, Jill, I'm on. Sweet. Are you there? Right, okay.
Yes, yeah, yep, ready.
Okay, I'm Ian Johnson. I live at 84 Grosvenor Street, and I've lived in the Golf Links estate for over 30 years. And during that time, I've worked hard at protecting the values of the Golf Links estate over a number of projects. I'm representing some like-minded neighbours tonight, Bernadette Primisi, Rod Force, Andrew Bowie and Jane Lane. I believe the house shouldn't be demolished. The planning scheme in relation to the golf links estate says the house should be demolished. In order to be consistent with the predominant pattern of housing development of the golf links estate, the house should be retained and repaired. The predominant and desired pattern consists of single dwellings on blocks of land with backyards. It would be possible to carry out the necessary repairs to restore the house to an acceptable standard. The cost of repair, which is the owner's responsibility, should not be a factor in the decision-making by the council. The owner has purchased the property with the responsibility of investigating the defects which were readily observable and the responsibility of investigating the conditions of the planning scheme in the GLE. Almost every house in the GLE is built on reactive clay and to the building standards of the 1920s. We and our neighbours have had to rectify structural issues because of inadequate building and foundations. The situation of 5 Alexander Street is not exceptional. In terms of the planning scheme, 2 of the units are outside the building envelope. Unit 2, part of the top level, and the roof are significantly outside of the building envelope and will cause major overshadowing and loss of amenity to 4 bedrooms at 3 Alexander Street. 1/3 of the top floor of Unit 2 should be reduced in size to make it comply. That's outside the building envelope. Let's see.
Is there anything else that you wanted to add, Mr. Johnson?
No, that's basically it. That's really what it comes down to, the fact that I don't think that the building should be demolished and that the developer should just repair it.
Thank you. So, committee, could those of you who want to ask questions speak up now, please?
Thank you.
Councillor Dutton.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to ask Ian one question. Ian, you have read the report, and there are 2 engineers who are qualified, have made recommendations that it should be demolished.
Yeah.
Do you not agree with that?
No, I think that the structural report from Pitt and Sherry, which is an independent report, I thought was a little bit on the fence, and it recommended that an alternative single-storey development be explored if demolition does take place. So I think it's still a questionable issue. It's still the responsibility, I think, for the applicant to explore the situation, knowing that the buildings can't be demolished under normal circumstances, unless there are exceptional reasons. And they're in no different boat. They're not in a different situation to the rest of the houses in the golf links estate. We all have to do structural work from time to time in varying degrees. So that I've read the Pitt and Sherry report. It's a bit on the fence, so I can't see why they can't carry out the repairs. And if that involves the demolition of some part of the house and rebuilding it in the same fashion, well, so be it.
Alderman Barakis, then Alderman Briscoe.
Thank you, Chair, and through you. Mr. Johnson, just noting what you've said about your views as to whether or not this should be demolished in the first place. Are there any impacts or issues around amenity that you have any concerns of, or is it simply that?
I do have that issue about that. The effect on some neighbours, particularly, I guess, the units on the eastern side of the development, they'll be overshadowed by the 2-storey nature of one of the units. it's a bit it is also unclear what effect the units will have on the properties to the north of the development. I know that Rod Force lives in a house in View Street, and he's already really badly affected by 2 units that were built in the backyard of the adjoining property. And I spoke to him, and he was unsure about what effect the unit that's in the back of the development, the proposed development, would have on his property. And he feels that he's already badly affected by the units that were built a few years ago to the west of his property, and now he's got units diagonally, or this unit will be diagonally southwest of his property, and it'll be a double-storey unit. So I guess he will suffer privacy. I think he's concerned about that.
Thank you.
I did just have a follow-up. So I suppose, just asking that question was just in the context of reading the report and having a look at it. The officers sort of the only sort of real issue is the heritage and the demolition nature. So I was just sort of curious as to your take on that, given that the officers seem to report it in every other manner.
Yeah, well, I think I think that it doesn't satisfy. I mean, that's where my main argument is coming from. Really, it's the heritage aspect. I think it's it sets a precedent in terms of this would be what I think. I stand to be corrected, but I think this would be one of the first houses to be demolished since the Golf Links Estate Planning Scheme was developed. And so, therefore, if this was demolished, it would set a precedent for other people wanting to do that, to take a gamble, to take a risk, and spend time and effort into developing a scheme, hoping that it would be passed by council. I think that people shouldn't be rewarded. Applicants shouldn't be rewarded for taking a gamble like that. The council should be firm in terms of protecting the qualities of the Golf Links estate. And this house is it does have some nice, significant heritage qualities. I think it's kind of it comes from the early 1920s, so it's a bit unusual in terms of that. It's one of the first houses were built in the Golf Links estate. A lot of them were built in the late 20s and maybe 30s and all that. So it definitely has some really nice qualities. I like the veranda. It's quite like it.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you. That's all the questions, Alderman Barakis.
Thank you, Chair. Can I talk now?
We'll go to Alderman Briscoe, then Councillor Harvey.
Yeah, it must be very hard trying to do the Zoom meeting through your phone, Chair.
Also, yep, we managed, don't we?
Yes, well, you're doing well so far. Mr. Johnson, I accept the fact that golf.
Can I ask my wife for a drink of water? I'm getting dry.
Right, I'll hold my question.
Thanks.
There's not a cat coming across the screen or anything. We lost Helen.
I'm here. I'm trying to do too many things at once.
Yeah. Oh, God, we hope we get back to face-to-face meeting. Anyway, Mr. Johnson, thank you. Look, I accept the fact about the Golf Links estate is one of those very important Sandy Bay estates that we have to do everything that that you've been doing and your group there have been doing for a number of years. Except I did a tour of this particular house. I think the veranda is actually holding up the whole house or whole front house because it's a huge steel thing. And the side has got 3 degrees of movement. The windows are half popping out.
Yep.
and it's all covered up by a hedge. Now, later on, if we seek to approve this development, then I'll be seeking that we have a condition that the hedge remains. Except it might be a little bit shorter to get the driveway. But it's sort of like, do you, in your professional and your being a resident of this area, do you fight in the ditches for the worst example of a house falling down alongside a block of flats in not on the bottom side, university opposite, whatever? To me, it's the poorest example of the golf links estate. Could you respond to that? I mean, I've been slightly dramatic there.
My opinion is that it's a corner of the house that needs to be rebuilt. So what? It's just going to cost money to rebuild that part. Rebuild it.
And the back of it is, sorry to interrupt there, the back of it is, some of it is a concrete block extension. Walking around, it doesn't inspire me to do anything, and I like renovating old houses.
Well, that's where your imagination comes into it, and doing it contextually, and it could be beautiful.
It's a great spot. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Harvey. Councillor Harvey, do you want to take yourself off mute, please?
Yep, that's a good idea. First time for the evening.
No.
So I'm interested in how this interferes or how this overshadows View Street, because you've got another backyard from 77 Regent Street before you get near View Street.
Yeah. Look, I don't know, you see. Good question. It's just that the reason I made that point was that the Rod who lives in View Street didn't know. There was no architect's perspective from his backyard, and I guess the applicant wouldn't normally provide that, but he did raise that with me. He said, what's going to be the effect of this building on my backyard? And we don't know. Really, that's all I'm saying.
So he's next door to those 2 units at 26.
Yeah.
So I've visited his backyard before. It's unfortunate that he's got those units and also the student warehouse at 3 Alexander Street. So but also as Alderman Briscoe said, this house is a difficult renovation, I think.
Yeah.
Very challenging. And it's double brick.
You have further questions, Councillor Harvey?
Yeah. So being double brick and having been so neglected for a long time, and you said that everyone's got a responsibility to look after the houses, but this one hasn't been maintained over what seems to be a really long period.
Yeah.
So to catch up now, I understand what you've said, that you got to do the ongoing maintenance, but this has missed out on decades of maintenance.
Yeah. Look, it's at the end of the day, it's your decision, and I'm not sorry. That sounded a bit rude, but that's my position. That here we've got a rule that says houses shouldn't be demolished. We've got an applicant that's put up a scheme where the house is demolished. He's done his investigation. He knows, he should know full well the cost of repairing the house, and he's done the sums, and he thinks he can turn a greater profit, obviously, by doing the development that he's done. Look, all I'm saying is I'm putting the case that the house shouldn't be demolished, that the house should be repaired, and I think Pitt and Sherry's report was on the fence on that one, so it could happen. So that's all I'm saying, really. It's up to you.
All right. Thanks for the answer. And I just want to say I do respect your your views on this and your sterling effort to defend the golf links estate, because it's really important to have locals like you looking after their territory. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. Is there any other questions from any of the committee members? If not, we'll go to the applicant, who is represented by Mr. Fraser Reid and Mr. Brad Williams. So over to you, and you can hear some of the concerns already raised. I'll let you make your case.
Hang on.
There you go.
Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair. I have with me Daniel and Amy, the proponents as well, and it's worth noting that they live just around the corner, 3 houses away, for 5 years, and renovated that property and did a beautiful job of it, and they understand the value of this precinct. It's not that they're trying to destroy it. But the key thing is that this is a site that has been identified, that it can't be feasibly retained, and that Peter Spratt, who is a heritage expert and very well respected engineer, that's his opinion, and I'm sure he wouldn't come to that conclusion lightly. So we all understand that old houses actually have some challenges. This is not that situation. This is a situation where the house is absolutely derelict. And so I won't dwell on that anymore, but the expert advice is that it's reasonable to demolish it. So that being the starting position, what do you do with this site? And obviously the new development needs to be sympathetic to the area. And if I just take you to a couple of photos in the council agenda on pages 4 and 5, it's pages 481 and 482, you can see the views up and down the street at the moment. And as Alderman Briscoe sort of alerted to, really is the hedge that's the only thing that you can see in this street. Certainly very happy to talk about retaining that, subject to just some modifications for the access way. Just quickly, in terms of planning matters, council's assessment is that it does comply, and that's my assessment also. Parking complies. The broader issue about this site as a logical infill development site stacks up, and it is on the fringe of the area where there is, quite a different character to the rest of the precinct. We've only got a short time, so I'll just throw to Brad to just respond to the Heritage Officer's points, and then we can discuss anything. To you.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Fraser. Look, I guess I've taken on board Mr. Spratt's engineering report, and I think from my point of view, that's inarguable. My assessment of the significance of the building is that it is significant in sort of the lower end of demonstrating the whole golf links estate style of architecture. But again, I've just taken the view that the paramount issue being the engineer's report, and as confirmed by Pitt and Sherry, is that the building's not restorable. So I've accepted that. I guess the second part is to meet the clause of the scheme, which requires something, the replacement development to be a suitable development in terms of the significance and the character of the precinct. So right through this design process, it's been quite a lengthy design process. I think this has sort of been brewing for 18 months or so. We've really looked closely at what the architectural character of the precinct is. And look, even though we're dealing with quite a cohesive precinct in terms of the architectural styling and era of buildings, from their form and materiality point of view, there's a whole lot of diversity in that area. And that's what the architects have picked up on in terms of roof form and materiality, not aiming to be a direct copy, but something which is suitable, sympathetic to that wider and fairly diverse character. And again, in my heritage impact assessment, I've looked at this notion of how the architects have gone through the design rationale of, yes, it is multiple dwellings, but to try and, from public vantage points at least, give the impression of large house with ancillary building at the rear, to avoid that block-like appearance of I guess, not really wanting to use next door as the example. It was obviously a different time, different planning scheme, but to avoid that block-like character, which I think is inappropriate from a multiple dwelling point of view in this area.
Thanks, Mr. Williams. Okay, I'll open it to the committee for questions. Who would like to start? If you could just let me know. Any questions? Councillor Harvey.
Thanks, Chair. I'm interested in your thoughts with regard to retaining the hedge.
Look, I've not rated the hedge as highly heritage significant. In my report, I think, just from memory, it's post-1940s. I don't think it appeared of a 1946 aerial photo. Look, it certainly has, I guess, aesthetic appeal. I don't want to confuse that with heritage significance. So admittedly, I'm sort of on the fence whether the hedge stays or goes.
All right, thank you.
Councillor Dutta.
Thank you, Chair. Just one question with regards to the 3 two-storey townhouses that is proposed. Do you think this is suitable and complementary to replace it with that instead of one-storey building?
I guess I've taken this on its merits. This is what I've been asked to assess the heritage impact of, and my conclusion is that this is suitable. I've not necessarily been asked to test a lot of alternatives, but again, I think the design intent being for the appearance of this building from public vantage points to appear like a sympathetic single dwelling. Yes, there's 2 joined at the front, and there's another one in the back, but from a form and scale point of view, I don't think it's going to be hugely obvious that it is constituting multiple dwellings.
Thank you.
Are there any further questions? Are there any further questions? No further questions. Okay, thank you. I'll now open it for discussion, and just note that Ms. Aby will be speaking to this, but we also have our Heritage Officer, Mr. Nick Booth. Are there any questions, or would anybody like to move any motion?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Chair.
Then Councillor Coates.
Yep. Look, I've thought deeply about this and what would be the best outcome for the neighbourhood, and ideally spending a lot of money rebuilding this house. However, in this particular instance, and while I would, be very reticent to support the demolition of a house that I thought was redeemable or I thought was recoverable, in this situation, it's very difficult to support the officer's recommendation to keep, well, not to keep the house necessarily, but to build, in a form that they, would be acceptable to the heritage officers. But I don't think the heritage officers are also suggesting that the house, is 100%, needs to be retained 100%. I think they've said that if it was demolished, that you'd need to build in a particular style. But I'm going to move the recommendation for approval to go ahead with this development, not the officer's recommendation, because I just don't agree that this house is savable. I think it really is quite dilapidated, and it's just too far gone for my likings. So I will move an alternative recommendation that the development application be approved. Now, when it comes to the hedge, I'm not attached to the hedge, and I don't think that needs to be retained as well. And we could end up with a much better outcome for the street, rather than a bulky hedge on the street that I don't think adds much to the visual amenity of the street, or with the passive surveillance that we talk about endlessly, about not wanting to have front yards blocked by high fences so that we do actually see the street from the house and the house from the street. So I wouldn't support any amendment to try and keep the hedge.
So what is the motion for approval? Is it subject to conditions, Councillor Harvey?
Well, we can debate that. I'll listen to the other contribution from councillors.
Councillor Coates.
Look, thank you, Chair. I had the opportunity this morning to meet the applicant and go through the house, and a scary experience. At any moment, it could have fallen on me. Look, it's very clear that when you read the engineering reports in advance and then you actually go and visit the site, it really does just reinforce, in my mind, and I think that the community expectation upon going to the actual residence is that it's well beyond, it's not redeemable, and look, ultimately then it becomes a matter of is what is proposed to go onto that site appropriate for the area. And look, I think the council assessment and my assessment is that it is. In some ways, weirdly enough, the hedge has meant that for the last decades, even though it is a heritage viewing looking house, it hasn't really been of much view to the streetscape. I know at some angles you can see it, but predominantly it has actually been blocked, weirdly enough. I don't know if that was necessarily their design in putting it in, but obviously over time it's grown, so it's become there. Look, I'm not committed necessarily to the hedge, albeit I guess any established tree that would take decades and decades to grow, you'd obviously want to think carefully before you got rid of it, because you can't easily reinstate it. But sorry, my cat's going to look. I think in my mind, when I was reading through the reports and the heritage officer and sort of weighing up the two, whenever you get an engineer's report and you get a second engineer's report that say, look, this thing just structurally isn't savable, you always have alarm bells ring, and look, it was reinforced today when I had the opportunity to go through. So I'll be supporting the foreshadowed motion by Alderman Harvey.
Thank you, Councillor Coates. Alderman Briscoe, then Councillor Dutta.
Thank you, Chair. Look, I'm glad Councillor Harvey did move the motion for approval. I would have done so a moment ago if he hadn't. As to the fence, I have a different view. It has greened the street. Interestingly, Councillor Harvey doesn't believe in greening the street in this case, or that he wants to degreen it. And I noticed one of the representatives.
I have to do a point of order there, Chair.
What's your point of order, Councillor Harvey?
Well, Alderman Briscoe is implying something that's just not true, so I'd like him to withdraw his silly comment.
Alderman Briscoe?
Oh, look, if I could read out a representation about the hedge, that might clear up Councillor Harvey's mind about it. I mean, it was basically a little dig, and if he doesn't like the little dig, I'll take it back.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It was a
Go ahead, Alderman Briscoe.
Yeah, thank you. The key thing here is that a representative has said the existing hedge should be listed on the significant tree register and protected as contributing to locally important and recognised garden settings. Now, whilst others on the committee here don't like hedge, I particularly don't like hedges, but I think this hedge does have some streetscape value, and in the greening of the world that we should all be involved in, I think it does contribute. If I'd like, whilst Councillor Harvey's moved the motion, I'd like an advice rather than a condition, advice that the applicant consider retaining the appropriate parts of the hedge. So I wonder if
happy to include that. Yep.
All right. Thank you for that. And essentially, as I said earlier to the representative, who over decades have done a really good job in promoting the Golf Links estate. Look, it doesn't need an engineer to say that house is hopeless, or the existing house is hopeless. It's a nightmare to renovate. If it was a very important building that had great social and colonial things, you probably would spend the money to renovate it. But it's a lot easier if it's a modern, well-designed townhouses like these three will be. I think it will help the housing stock of Hobart, but not diminish in any great way the golf links estate, because as we've pointed out when I was talking to the questioning the Mr. Johnson, right beside is I think it's a 1960 block of flats, you know, and that certainly doesn't fit in with the golf links estate value. So I think it's going to be a positive addition to the area and contribute to the housing stock of Hobart. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Briscoe. Councillor Dutta, then Alderman Barakis.
Thank you, Chair. Now, I read the report and I was very curious with the fact that the two experienced engineers suggested, even though there was a suggestion made that one was sitting on the fence, but having read the report and their professional advice, to demolish was for me the way to go. I also visited the place and was quite shocked at the condition of the house. So therefore, I have no difficulty with the house being demolished. Point number one. Point number two, my question is whether the replacements two-story townhouses is complementary to the precedent. Now, that's where my question is. Now, having been there and seen on the map and also physically that the houses are going to be behind, as it were, it won't create that visibility problem. And so therefore, I am inclined to support this, even though I quite agree with the arguments presented by the officers. But in this regard, having seen the place and having seen the condition of the house, I would support it as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dutta. Alderman Barakis.
Thank you, Chair, and I'm glad that Councillor Harvey moved this one. It looks like it's one that will have a pretty conclusive support from the rest of the committee. I think it's important. I think, you know, normally we go through the individual performance criteria or the individual components of the performance criteria for the heritage, and we debate these this way. But I think it's almost a moot point here, because I think when we have a existing building that I think multiple people have sort of agreed and experts have agreed is probably not good for anything other than demolition. You've got something that doesn't, you know, from my perspective, given that it's covered by that hedge, is not even currently relevant to the streetscape. I don't think that it is a building that currently contributes to the whole cultural, the local cultural heritage. It doesn't contribute to the heritage streetscape, because most people walking past there wouldn't even know it existed. And those that can see it currently see a dilapidated building that, if anything, detracts from the culture of the area. So given that, and you know, I support the inclusion of the advice. I think if it's feasible and prudent to do so, they should try and keep that hedge. But you know, if what we have is a application that otherwise meets all of the planning criteria, it's an application that will once again add something to the community that we definitely need. And I think, you know, if you look at the heritage argument, I think that, you know, given the state of the current building, I think is almost a moot point. And I'll make the point. It's a bit of an aside almost, but we had that report recently. We had the statement recently from the tenants union about the vacant properties, and I know I have some issues with that report. I think that it needs some more context as to the broader statistic. But this is one of those sites that, you know, if this was to not get approved, I don't think anybody's planning on doing anything else with this site. I don't think, you know, if this was not to be approved, I absolutely believe it will sit there for another 10, 20 years and continue to progress into dilapidation. So this is the example of activating sites for housing in a way that is sensitive to the area, and in a way that, in my view, will not result in the loss of significant cultural heritage for the area, given the condition that it's currently in. I don't think there's much left to lose. So I'd be supporting this. It's glad to see that there looks to be a majority support amongst the committee, and I'd be encouraging everybody to support Councillor Harvey's motion.
Thank you. I have a question for you, Mr. Booth, or perhaps Ms. Aby, but firstly I'll start with you, Mr. Booth. Is there a demolition order on this house?
Not that I'm aware of, no, Chair.
And so whilst you know, one of the reasons for refusal is because directly related to demolition. Can you just describe other reasons why it's suggested for refusal, please?
Well, Chair, the planning scheme is perfectly clear. It states that all requirements need to be met before we should be allowing the demolition of a building that is recognised as being a contributory building within the precinct, something which Mr. Williams agrees with. The first is that there's no economic, social or safety reasons, or should I say that there are those reasons which are of greater value. Second is that there's no prudent or feasible alternatives. Both of those two, we as officers, we've read the same reports. The engineer's report is perfectly clear that the building is in a very poor state and that it's not really prudent or feasible to try and maintain the building. But the third one, and bearing in mind that, as I said, that all need to be met, is that the replacement building needs to be more complementary to the heritage values of the precinct than the existing building. Now, obviously, the building has already been identified as being of heritage value to the precinct. And therefore, the reason for refusal is based not necessarily on the loss of the existing building, but on the inability of the proposed replacement buildings to actually be considered as complementary. And by that, I mean the building as it stands at the moment is obviously a single-storey building. The heritage precinct is clearly identified as being predominantly single-storey. The way that the buildings are actually arranged on the sites in terms of the original subdivision is incredibly clear. And therefore, the replacement of a single-storey building with 3 two-storey buildings, 2 of which are located to the front of the site, as opposed to a single building located to the front of the site, and containing roof planes that are far higher and at a greater angle than is currently seen within the precinct, would not be seen as being complementary, or should I say more complementary, to the precinct as it stands at the moment.
So is that so? If you're suggesting if this were one single story or possibly two buildings, but of single story, then it would. I mean, would that pass that test or go closer to passing that test of being complementary? I mean, is it not an impossible ask?
Absolutely not. So, Chair, obviously that would all come down to the individual design if it were put to us. But if it were single-storey buildings, which indeed also contain potentially 3 units on the site, then providing that what you're seeing from the front of the site are single-storey buildings that contain enough elements in terms of their basic form to match in with the general form of the precinct, then I would say that that would be considered as acceptable.
Okay. And just in relation to retention, should this be approved, retention of the hedge, what's your opinion in relation to that?
Well, the report stated that we didn't think that the hedge was of any particular merit. From a heritage precinct point of view, it makes no mentions of the importance of hedges. Of course, it screens the site, but we would argue that retention of a hedge which could potentially just be removed because such works would be exempt, and also on the basis of perhaps screening a development is perhaps not the best route to go through to.
All right, thank you. Okay. All right, so we have had the discussion. Was there anybody else wanted to make any other points before I just might make a few comments?
Yeah, I just had a follow-up question for Mr. Booth, just based off your questions for him, if I might.
Yes.
Thank you. And three, Mr. Booth, when you talk about the all three criteria need to be met, that is in reference to E13.8.1, which is on page 28 and 29. Yeah, 29 of the report. Is that what you're referring to?
Through you, Chair. Yes, that's correct.
So look, my interpretation of the wording of this might be a bit different. So I'm hoping for a bit of clarification. I get that it's got, the unless all of the following apply, and it's got 1, 2, 3, where it's the environmental, social, economic, etc. I get that all three of those need to apply should this criteria be triggered. And you've explained that well. But right at the beginning of this performance criteria, it says demolition must not result in the loss of any of the following building or works that contribute to the historical, cultural, heritage significance of the project, fabric or landscape elements, etc., etc. I'm not sure, given, look, if one was to take the view, like as I have, and I think some of the other elected members have, that given the state of the existing building, what is there currently doesn't contribute to the historical significance. And if that's the case, I'm not sure if this criteria is actually triggered at all, in which case the following three criteria, all three of which need to be met, wouldn't be relevant in the first place. I get that if it's triggered, they all need to be, but I'm not sure that it's triggered in the first place, given the state of the existing building.
For you, Chair, the applicant's own heritage consultant acknowledges that it is a complementary building. The building is single story. It was built as part of the original subdivision. It contains most, if not all, of the elements that you would expect from a building of this type, which is matched again and again coherently throughout the wider precinct. I think it's acknowledged that there is damage to the building, but I don't think that you would read any of that damage from the street unless you were looking specifically for it. So I would disagree that it doesn't actually make a contribution.
Okay, if there are no further questions, Councillor Harvey, do you want to have the amendment in relation to the hedge separate?
No, it wasn't a condition, Chair. It's an advice. It's not a condition.
It's advice. So
advice. It's not a condition.
Yep. Sorry. So
and Alderman Councillor Harvey accepted it in as a advice.
Councillor Harvey, could you just put yourself off mute and just answer my question, please?
I've accepted it as advice.
Right, thank you.
You said, and what I'd like is for Miss Abey to prepare the standard conditions of approval for the council meeting on the 28th. I assume that's exactly what would occur. Can I just confirm that through you, Chair?
Yeah, I can, through you, Chair, I can certainly have those ready for next week. I have actually provided potential conditions for you to consider, and they can be put on the screen if you'd like to do so now.
Okay, yeah, I think we should put those up just so we're all clear. Yep.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Harvey. Yes, we'll put those up then. Okay, I don't know if we'll be able to read all of those right now. Ms. Abey, can you? Yeah, I can't read this at all. So can you give us an indication as to the conditions?
They're fairly standard conditions. The only heritage condition is that the development be have colours that are similar to those that already exist in the precinct, and we'd ask that further details of the proposed colours are provided to us before the building approvals are provided. Otherwise, the conditions are largely stormwater and engineering, which are standard conditions.
All right, thank you. Are there any questions of Ms. Abey in relation to these? Or can I now put the motion? You'll have to speak up. I can't actually see anybody if there's any problems. Perhaps if we can, does anybody need more time to read that, or can we just put the motion and have everybody before we go to full council next week?
I think put the motion, Chair, and we can have a read of the conditions during the week if they're circulated.
So is there any dissent to the motion? I am dissenting. If I'm the only am I the only person dissenting to this? Am I the only person dissenting to this motion?
Yes, Chair. All the others are in.
Yes.
All the others are in favour.
Okay, thank you. All right, so the motion is carried and it will go to full council next Monday. Right, we go back to the order of the agenda, and we go to 7.1, which is applications under the Sullivan's Cove Planning Scheme, 7.1.1, which is 50 Salamanca Place signage.
I'm happy to move the motion. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Noy, I think you're back for this. Could you give us some indication as to any concerns relating to this, please?
Through you, Chair, certainly not from a planning perspective.
Right, okay, so it's just the wording of the plaque, I take it, which might be not.
Alderman Briscoe has his hand up. He might like to comment on.
Alderman Briscoe, can you speak, please?
Thank you. Can you see me too?
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, look, I've taken an interest in this. I'd like to think that we could put advice, as Alderman Councillor Harvey moved the motion. I wonder if we could put advice that the officers consider another plaque which commemorates the National Council of Women who did have a preliminary market at Salamanca, 6 stalls for a number of weeks in the year before it would officially became the Salamanca market covered by the council decisions. Now, why I got interested in this is that I got contacted by Bonnie Cooper through her daughter. Bonnie Cooper is 94 years old and was one of the last surviving people from the National Council of Women who ran those stalls in 1971. Prior to the council officially having a market in 1972. And she was concerned that we haven't acknowledged the key role of the National Council of Women. And today I was talking to Lynley Grant, who some people might know, particularly Councillor Burnett, Deputy Lord Mayor Councillor Burnett, who's an incredible community worker. Sadly, she's in a nursing home now, but she was really keen to make sure the council was aware of the role of the National Council of Women, and she was the secretary for years and years and years. And there were other key women running these stalls. It's almost like a who's who of Hobart at the time, including Ruth Clementi, who was Dr. Clementi's wife, and Bonnie Cooper, as I mentioned, and so on. There were, including the current Lord Mayor's grandmother. So there were significant women who used the stalls prior to the council.
You're breaking up a little bit, Alderman Briscoe, for me. I'm not sure if that's the case for everybody else.
Yeah, I've lost him. I can't hear.
Right, okay.
If I can jump in.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm happy to accept an amendment that we investigate
council,
the other group,
Well, perhaps we refer that off to another committee, but rather than have that as a motion. Alderman Briscoe.
Sorry, I just went offline there, Chair, so I didn't get the last bit. Can I
cut out? I think we got the gist of it, but I think Mr.
I
Noy.
hadn't quite finished. Sorry, I hadn't quite finished, Chair. Sorry, and I got cut off somehow. Can you hear me?
Alderman Briscoe, I was just going to suggest that we might take it to another committee, but go ahead.
Oh yeah, look. If that's your advice, perhaps I could have a motion after this motion to refer to the appropriate committee, which presumably is the Parks Committee, actually. But anyway, another thing to do with this, I noticed it just the plaque that's just mentions the current Lord Mayor, and I was just wondering. I'm told, but it hasn't been confirmed, that this was consistent with the plaque that went there for the 25-year anniversary. If it's consistent with the plaque that went to the 25-year anniversary, in other words, just mention the Lord Mayor, not the elected members, I'm fine with it. But if in my time in council, when we've had plaques, we've always made sure we mention the elected members of the time. Now, it may not be enough room on a small plaque to have this all listed, but I think it's so important that we would have the Lord Mayor, Deputy Lord Mayor, elected members or something like that. But look, if it's consistent with the 25-year plaque, then I'm fine with it. You know, we're following in the same pattern. But if it's not, and perhaps we could be informed by memo or by email before the council meeting, because I'll move an amendment. I'm fairly sure the plaque hasn't been cast, but really my significant point was that we've got to make sure that these women who are significant in Hobart's history, social history, are commemorated as part of the celebrations of 50 years of Salamanca Market, officially run by the Hobart City Council. So thank you, Chair. I think I finished my words.
Yeah. Thank you. It's a good point. We can do that in a moment. And I just wonder if we can, and there's a lot of 22nd of January 1972 to 22nd of January 2022. I mean, it would just be good just to have a hyphen or something instead of two. I mean, it's a very wordy plaque as it is, but I mean, that's just sort of editorialising those. Is there any other comment that anybody wants to make before we move Councillor Harvey's motion?
Chair, I just could comment that if we had a QR code, we could change it every week, depending on what we wanted to say.
Yeah, probably. Well, there you go. We're so used to QR codes now. Okay, so with those minor suggestions, I'll put the motion. Is there any dissent? Being no dissent, I'll declare that carried and have your foreshadowed motion, Alderman Briscoe, to send off to for consideration at the appropriate committee. Alderman Briscoe.
Are you on mute, Alderman Briscoe?
So to send out to the appropriate committee, which I think is Parks, consideration be given to an appropriate plaque commemorating the role of the National Council of Women in the official Salamanca Market in those few months before. So if we could send that to the committee, the appropriate committee, I'll be pleased. Thank you.
Thank you. Put that. Is there any dissent? Being no dissent, thank you for that, Alderman Briscoe. I declare it carried. We're back to the City of Hobart Interim Planning Scheme. So item 7.2.2, and we're back on Sandy Road, 1816 Sandy Bay Road. You may remember that this came to us a couple of meetings ago. We had it deferred in the hope that there could be some discussion by the applicant with the concerned representatives, but unfortunately I don't think we've had any shift. Mr. Noy, is that right?
That's correct, Chair.
Okay, so and there, I think elected members probably have received information from the representatives again, but I'll open the item for discussion.
I'm happy to move the recommendation, Chair. I haven't got too much more to say that wasn't said last time.
Okay, thank you. Any further discussion?
Just a question.
Councillor Dutta.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, I just wanted clarification on the intensification of the existing access. Will there be intensification?
Mr. Noy?
No, not necessarily, Chair. They'll still be accessing the two dwellings, so that doesn't change. The capacity of the dwelling will increase, of course, with additional bedroom, but that does not necessarily mean intensification of the use of the driveway.
Thank you.
Any further comment? No further comments or questions?
Just a comment, Lord Mayor. We're only approving the development application. Any proposal for short stay accommodation will come to us in the future, because that's been some of the issues that we've been receiving complaints about. So that's correct, isn't it, Director? We're only discussing or approving potentially the development application. Anything to do with short stay accommodation will be a future development application if it does ever come.
That's correct, Chair. A new application would be necessary for the intensification of the short stay visitor accommodation if this development was to proceed.
Just on that, I don't know if it's worth or doable or practical in the for the purpose of clarification, to avoid this being misinterpreted, that some sort of note or acknowledgement that of what Councillor Harvey just said be attached to that. Be attached to this. I don't know. It can't really be attached as advice, really, but I'm not sure how one would do that. But can anything like that be done?
Mr. Noy?
Yes, look, I think if it's not already in there, then happy to include that as additional advice. Yeah,
it's more advice to the public than it is to the applicant, but just a sort of just something to spell out that this is approval for the building that's been applied for and the construction. It does not include any short stay, and that would require a further permit. If people are happy with that, I'm happy to just include that in the motion.
Yeah, it doesn't look like it's in the advice to the applicant, but yeah, for what that's worth, Alderman Barakis. Look, I still have concerns with this application, and it's very hard to have conditions which look at the stability of, like, the geotechnical instability at the rear of the development and the parking in particular. I sought to speak to the neighbour at 818, or the neighbours at 818, and could see what concerns they have in relation to ensuring that bank was stable. Mr. Noy, is that covered off in this application?
Yes, Chair, it is. There is some advice on that. The area that's covered by the landslide hazard area is only, in fact, related to a debris flow runoff or run out area from upslope sources area. So anything that occur in that section, small section that's covered by this, won't have any material effect on that hazard. So the officers are satisfied that this should be not be an area of concern for council.
And in relation to the driveway coming down off Sandy Bay Road, again, is that? I mean, I guess that's probably not in this application as such, is it?
Yes, it is. There is some widening, as I understand it, but it's not impacted by the issue associated with that hazard. So landslide hazard area. It's not material to to any decision council would be making in relation to this application.
Look, I have quite a lot of sympathy, as probably all of us do, in relation to the impact on neighbours from what occurs at this property and what seems to be an intensification of this. This won't be going to council, so I will, in some ways reluctantly, but I won't be supporting this evening. So if there's no further discussion, Councillor Dutty, you wanted to say something?
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Now, having asked the question about intensification, for me, there is obviously an increase in capacity. Now, if there is an increase in capacity, then the logic of that leads to the conclusion that there's going to be intensification of the existing excesses. And therefore, I will have my reservations to support this.
Okay, thank you. All right, so if there's no further comment, I'll put Alderman Barakas's motion. Is there dissent? Can you raise your hands if there's any dissent? Dave, can you tell me who's raised their hands, please?
Yeah, that's 4-2, Chair. So against the Councillor Dutta and Deputy Lord Mayor, for Alderman Barakas, Councillor Harvey, Alderman Briscoe and Councillor Coates.
Okay, so that is carried. Thank you. So we now go to 7.2.3, 72 Summerhill Road, West Hobart, dwelling. Mr. Noy, is there any other advice or information you have apart from the report that we have before us?
Sorry, Chair, that was in relation to
72 Summerhill Road. I think we're up to 7.2.
Yeah, no, look, I think the report speaks for itself. Clearly, this follows on from a previous application for 2 multiple dwellings. The applicant has gone away and considered the feedback from the initial assessment of that application and has modified their proposal. The other issue with this is that while there might have been approved proposals next door to this proposal, those proposals have not substantially commenced, so we can't necessarily take them into consideration when assessing the performance criteria. And so that has meant that a number of those matters as to what impact on what might occur next door can't be considered.
Okay. All right, thank you. Any further discussion? Or can I have somebody move this motion, please? Alderman Barakas, thank you. No further discussion? Okay, I'll put the motion as moved by Alderman Barakas. Is there any dissent? There being no dissent, declare that carried. Thank you. Now, item 8, we're up to reports, which is the City Planning Advertising Report. Can I have somebody move that, please? Alderman Barakas, thank you. Any comments or anything of note, Ms. Abbey?
I think everything on the list is marked as for delegation to the Director, but there are a number that will come to the committee due to the number of representations. The first one is 720 Sandy Bay Road. Some illegal works were done, and so there's an application for legitimising some chimneys that have been constructed. And the other one is 1/4 Sunvale Avenue, which is a visitor accommodation application.
I see, thank you. Okay, all right. So that's been moved by Alderman Barakas. Is there any, Councillor Harvey?
Can I just confirm that you said chimneys that had been constructed, not had been deconstructed?
Correct.
Yeah, okay, other way around. All right.
It's a crazy world.
Yeah, thanks.
And 2 Castray Esplanade, can you describe that?
Yeah, so that application or that property already has a number of permits which are authorising both visitor accommodation and residential uses. This application applies to make various small changes to the physical development, and there's also a component which is an application to convert some existing offices into residential.
Right, thank you. Okay. If there are no further questions, I'll move that. Is there any dissent? No dissent. Thank you. I declare that carried. Delegated decisions 8.2. Councillor Dutta, you move that. Thank you. All right, any comments? If not, I'll put that. Those, is there any dissent? No dissent. I declare that carried. Item 9 is the committee action status report. Councillor Harvey. Yep, thank you. Any comments about any of these items? If not, I'll declare that carried. And questions without notice. Oh, sorry.
I don't think my hand being raised, Chairman. Can I ask a question without notice?
Yes, please do. Yep, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. You can hear me?
I can hear you now.
Can you hear me?
Yep. You're having a little bit of trouble with your sound by the sounds of it, Alderman Briscoe.
Yeah, I'm going to step out for just 2 minutes, okay?
Alderman Briscoe, are you live at the moment? Because I can't hear anything. And you blank. Oh, now you're back.
You've blanked now. You've blanked and Will's blanked.
I'm still here, Alderman Briscoe. Keep going. Can you?
All right.
Can you
I'll try again.
Thank
if
you.
You can hear me now. I'll try again. Can I ask questions about the rezoning application of Sandy Bay campus? If no, I'll ask the questions in close.
Mr. Noy?
Well, it depends on the nature of the question, Chair, but I think in open is fine. If we need to move any response into close, then I'll do so.
Okay, thank you. The question would be then, what extra information has been required from the university for its rezoning application?
Chair, I'll take that one on notice. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Any further questions? If not, I'll ask that somebody move that this, we move into the close. Alderman Briscoe, you happy to move that? Thank you. And I thank the public who have been watching and putting up with our technical